Hey, what is going on, guys? Today on the channel we are going to be taking a look at the iPad 2 and see what it's like to use here in 2020. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first off, let's talk about a few things before we get going. I know you're probably looking at this huge screen crack, and yes, that was totally my fault, and it is the first Apple device that I ever cracked the screen on. Basically, long time ago, it had a smart cover on it, and I just barely bumped it against the table with the smart cover over the display, and I opened it up to this. So don't ask me how it happened. I have no idea how just a little bump on a table did that, but yeah, it's got a cracked screen. I'm sorry, you have to look at that the whole video. Also, this was my first ever iPad that I actually owned. So with the iPhone 5, which I just did that video, you should check it out with the link below, but that was my first ever iPhone, and this is my first ever iPad. Now, this device was a major improvement over the first generation iPad. The design was changed, the performance was upgraded, even added cameras for the very first time. Some may say that, well, this is one of the biggest iPad updates of all time, and I could definitely see that. So this thing came out all the way back in 2011, and it had iOS 4.3 installed. This thing actually received support all the way to iOS 9, which is the latest version that I'm running on this iPad 2. So it received a good amount of support for several years, as you can see. Now, when this thing was brand new, you could choose either silver or black. The back of the iPad was the same aluminum finish, regardless of which color you choose, but you either got the silver, or I guess you could say white front face, or the black. It was offered in Wi-Fi only models or Wi-Fi and 3G models, and you can get this in 16, 32, and 64 gigabytes. Now my iPad 2 is the white Wi-Fi 16 gigabyte model. Now, I kind of got curious to see how much these things cost when they were brand new, so after a quick Google search, I found the Apple Newsroom site. And Apple has this article on there that says iPad 2 available tomorrow. And you can actually see the pricing and availability, and I was pretty shocked to see how much this thing cost back in 2011. I'll put the link down below in case you don't believe me, but this thing, the 16 gig model, brand new, Wi-Fi only, was $499 US. That is pretty wild, especially when you think about how we can get a $329 iPad 7th generation today. If you bumped up to 32 gigs, that's going to run you another $100 at $599, and then another $100 for the 64 gig at $699. And if you wanted 3G and Wi-Fi, well, that was going to be $629 for the 16 gigs, $729 for 32, and $829 for the 64 gig. So the pricing in this thing when it was new, pretty wild. I completely forgot it was that much money. But enough about how much this thing cost when it was brand new. Let's talk about the design of this thing. So it has the same aluminum back and construction that the iPad 1st gen had, but this iPad is much slimmer and lighter than the 1st gen iPad. Also, this featured the new curved backing, which was a lasting design that we saw through several iPads after the iPad 2. Now, the curved backing makes it much easier to hold in your hand, and it still feels great and modern today. Definitely feels much better than the 1st gen iPad did. Now, when you compare it to today's iPads, for example, the 10.2 inch 7th generation, it's definitely much more hefty, it's quite heavy. It does have the similar look, of course, that all iPads have over the years. You will notice, though, that the bezels are much thicker on the front, but it's really not too bad. This iPad also had a non-Retina display. We didn't see the Retina display until the next gen iPad. And because of that, well, yeah, it's not the best looking display, but it's still decent. But you do notice a screen gap in the display, so it is a non-laminated display, but hey, we still have those today as well. This iPad, of course, featured the traditional home button on the front. Also, something else that we did not have on the 1st generation iPad. You also notice the inclusion of cameras. So the 1st gen, of course, did not have cameras, and the iPad 2 did. Now, these cameras are definitely nothing to brag about. They're pretty bad. I actually cannot find the megapixels for the rear camera. It's got to be less than 1. I mean, the quality is just terrible. But it does shoot 720p video, 30 frames per second out the rear, although when you look at the video, it looks less than 720p. And the front-facing camera, well, that's even worse than the rear. But hey, it is nice that they have included cameras on this device, and the cameras, of course, only got better from there. Now, the performance of this iPad, it's still pretty decent today. This features Apple's A5 chip, and it only has 512 megabytes of RAM. Now, like I said earlier, this device had support all the way up to iOS 9, but everybody knows iOS 9, it didn't run too good, especially on the A5 chip. Now, when you're using this thing today, you definitely notice some lagging, some slowness, especially if you're browsing the web or loading applications. You may get bugs here and there, you may get application crashes, but honestly, you kind of get used to it, and if you're just using this device for like streaming or something like that, it's really not too bad. This thing can support modern applications such as YouTube, Netflix, so this is a good thing to just kind of have around as a streaming device. So can you still use the iPad 2 here today in 2020? Well, it's kind of difficult to say that. I would say yes and no. Definitely you don't want to use this as your main device, but if you have an old iPad 2 laying around your house and you just want a streaming device, watch some YouTube, maybe some Netflix, something like that, this thing is perfect for that. Now, if you're going to be using this as your main device, well, I think it's time to go ahead and just upgrade. I mean, you can get an iPad 7th Gen for $329 brand new. So overall, the iPad 2, it was a great upgrade from the first generation. Lots of great new features, design changes, and it still holds up surprisingly well here in 2020, although, just like any old Apple device, the support is going to get worse and worse. Apps are going to quit working, you're not going to be able to download them. Safari just keeps breaking more and more websites by the day. So yeah, if you're still trying to use this as your main device, I definitely would not do it. And I would most definitely not buy one of these off of eBay or something. You have an old one laying around, you hadn't been using it, you just want a device for some quick streaming or something like that. Maybe you want to give, this old iPad to a kid instead of buying them a new one. I think it's perfect for that. But anyways, guys, that's all I got for you today about the iPad 2. Let me know. Did you know anybody that used an iPad 2? Did you have an iPad 2? Or maybe are you still using it today? Or know somebody that's using it today? Be sure to leave your thoughts about the iPad 2 in the comments down below. Thank you all for your support, subscribing to the channel, watching the videos, leaving likes. It means a whole lot to me. But anyways, I will catch you all in the next video.